Well, welcome. Today we're going to be talking about projects versus products. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay. Make sure that works. It worked earlier, but I have been known to mess things up. Okay, so where that thumbs up is, there's lots of different things you can click there saying slow down, speed up, or I like what you're saying, or I don't like what you're saying. Feel free to mash on those anytime you feel that they're appropriate during this talk. It's a way to get some feedback, and sometimes that can be fun to see what people are thinking. Okay, I need to make one change here. I just realized. There we go. Okay, so projects versus products. That's what we're going to be talking about today. And just a heads up, next week we're going to be talking about agile aligned organization, which will kind of tie into what we're looking at here. So that's what we've got, where we're going. So for today's topic, I do want to say this is a very large area. Lots of things can be encompassed underneath this. So we're just going to kind of take a slice through it for what we can cover within this amount of time. There's lots of things that could be added. If there's something that you're like, oh, we didn't talk about this aspect, I think that would make a really interesting discussion. Feel free to shoot me an email. I'd love to hear about it. I did want to tell you a story. Something kind of fun happened this week. We got a call from my wife's best friend who lives in Connecticut. We're in Kansas. She lives in Connecticut. And she said she had something interesting to tell us. So this is my wife's best friend since high school. And she called up and said she was helping somebody out with some yard work and pulling weeds. And they got to talking there in Connecticut. And the person that she was working there with, they got to talking about project management and Agile. And this person said, "Hey, you know what? There's this really neat thing you can do if you're interested in this type of stuff. On Tuesday, there's these lunch and learns. This guy named Mark Sheed, my name's actually Shed, but that's close enough, runs these things, and they're really great, and you ought to come to it." So anyway, that made my day hearing about that. So uh, Anna, if you're on, thank you for telling our my wife's friend about that. It made me look better to my wife too. So that was a great thing. Okay, so first question for us in the Slido link is, what are we actually looking at here? In a single word, what is this? And I'm going to put the link in the chat one more time in case it doesn't come up for you. So here's a picture. What is that? So go ahead and type a single word that describes what you think you're looking at right here. And this does have a purpose. We're going to be we're talking about products versus projects. Get a few more people typing it in here. Okay, and this should pop up. You should be able to do this from within WebEx, or if not, in the chat. There's a little chat icon. I put a link. Go ahead and bring this up because this is how we're gonna do some interaction as we go. There's also a place to put questions, and at the end we will be giving away one of these fine T-shirts. So be aware of that. Okay, so let's see what people are thinking. So a crowd, yes, it is a crowd. Training, a festival, impressive humanity. The crowd is correct. There definitely is a crowd. People who look like ants. Okay, that's definitely one. Chaotic meditation. Okay, so this is actually a picture of Woodstock. So this is the Woodstock event. So here's some other pictures here. Chaotic is a very good way to describe it. They were shooting for trying to get, I think, 50,000 people there, and I think closer to 500,000 people showed up. So it was a very, very interesting event. Some other pictures here. Woodstock was from, let's see, it was August 15th through 18th, 1969 at a dairy farm in New York. And just in case you haven't been around dairy farms, those usually aren't the best place to put 500,000 people. You know, they're set up for cows. They're not set up for all the needs of 500,000 people. So expected 50,000, ended up with closer to 500,000. They didn't even finish the fence or ticket booth. They had to decide between a few things because they got moved at the last minute. So they finally had to basically make it a free concert because everybody was going to come in anyway. It nearly resulted in bankruptcy, but things turned around when the Woodstock documentary was released the next year because they had the film and recording rights. So that's what kind of saved them. They were actually doing this music festival to go ahead to try to raise money to start a recording studio was the original plan. 2 people died from drug overdoses. One was run over by a tractor because he went to a nearby field and laid down and went to sleep. And I guess the tractors went out to hay the fields or something like that. So it's very chaotic is a great way to put it. Grateful Dead singer, the Grateful Dead performer said they were getting shocked whenever they touched a mic, like the grounding wasn't right. And so whenever they touch a mic, it would shock them. And adding to the chaos, the group Iron Butterfly was stuck at LaGuardia Airport waiting for a helicopter that was never going to be sent. So lots and lots of chaos around this event. So another question, what is this? So single word, what's this? You opted out because you knew about the rain forecast. If you remember the 60s, you weren't really there, okay? Okay, so what is this a picture of? What are we looking at here? It's a theater, okay. It's more specific than that. There's one word that's used to often describe this. It is also in New York. I'll give that as a hint. Opera, yes, that's headed in the right direction. A music hall, okay. And keep in mind, let me give you this link here again. If you pull this up in a browser, it will put it up on the screen with everybody. Yes, we had somebody say Met. This is actually the Metropolitan Opera House. So, the Metropolitan Opera House. It was in this building right here. This was the original building that they had built. It's been going for over 140 years. It was founded in 1883. For people like Morgan, Roosevelt, and Vanderbilt, very rich families that were kind of that had recently come into wealth. And the existing opera house was being run by people, the old wealth at the time, and they weren't really excited about having these new upstarts come in and display their social status at their opera house. So they wouldn't let them buy tickets or buy seats or whatever. So they got together and started their own opera house. And the other one went out of business, I think 3 years later or something like that. So it was the Academy of Music Opera House was the one that went out of business. Um, so this is the old opera house, and then eventually moved to Lincoln Center. So they've had multiple buildings. The Metropolitan Opera even has their own software that they have developed for keeping in for marketing that they sell to other people. It's a very very large organization. Here's pictures of it in its current place, and the golden curtains that are part of it, I think, were donated by some group here in town, or some group there in New York. So this looks very, very different than what we just looked at. And I think this is a very good example, if we think about the difference between a project and a product. So let's look at these two things. We've got Woodstock, lasted 4 days. It was 32 acts, nearly went bankrupt, had 500,000 attendees. It had way too few restrooms. That was one of the big problems with it, which I think somebody said they'd gone in 94. And if I remember right, that was, I think there was a similar experience in 94. It was not an ongoing thing. I know they brought him back and started doing, there's these other ones that have come to kind of relive the past there. I don't even know how closely those are associated with it, but it's probably not even the original organization. It's a very different thing. Metropolitan Opera, on the other hand, instead of 4 days, they've been around for 140 years. They've got a $250 million endowment. So as they're trying to navigate changes in how people maybe perceive or attend opera, they've got a little bit of a buffer there that they're probably not just going to go out of business right away. They've moved into streaming and a bunch of stuff like that, try to take advantage of how people might like to consume opera. As a matter of fact, one of the things they're doing that's kind of interesting is they're partnering with movie theaters. So you can watch an opera in the movie theater in HD. I think it's actually live when they're performing it. They do 200 performances a year, and have nearly 800,000 attendees per year, and they have plenty of restrooms. That's another defining thing about Metropolitan Opera. So these are very, very different in the way that they're organized. So we think about how did the organization of Woodstock differ from the Met? So here's some questions for you. And this is going somewhere, so bear with me for a minute. So which one of these, the plan was for a one-time event? Let's get our polling fingers ready here. Okay, so yes, Woodstock was definitely going to be a one-time event. Metropolitan Opera was founded by a bunch of people that expected it to go on indefinitely, and it has up to this point. Which was more concerned about adhering to codes and standards? Do you think it's Woodstock or the Metropolitan Opera? Yes, and I mean, Woodstock was concerned about codes and standards just to try to keep from getting shut down, but that was about it. The Metropolitan Opera, on the other hand, has been very concerned. Their goal is to be there for a very long time, and if they don't meet fire code and they have to tear down the building or something, that would be a very big deal. So they're very much thinking long range and how long they're going to be there, whereas Woodstock is very much focused on was focused on just the one time, one and done. And this question doesn't really apply to anything, but just if you could go back in time, which would you rather attend? Woodstock 69, any one historical Met Opera performance, or a past Agile Lunch and Learn? Okay, wow, we've got 20% said a past Agile Lunch and Learn. Well, if there is one you would really wish you could have attended, tell me, because if there's interest, I will do it again. So most of us actually are on Woodstock. So as we're thinking about this, one thing I want to point out is that projects and products, it's not necessarily where one is bad. You can have a project that is very successful, and Woodstock, by some measurements, only 3 people died. Maybe that makes sense. There are lots of problems, but as far as its impact on culture, it has been very, very significant. So it's not necessarily that one of these is better or worse, but for many of the areas that we're in, if we try to manage a product like a project, we're going to get into trouble. If you think of it like this, if the Met were to put the same people in charge of managing things as were in charge of Woodstock, they probably wouldn't be around today. It's a very, very different approach and have very different outcomes. So if we think about kind of how the Met does things, this is from 2019, and the Metropolitan Opera, Porgy and Bess was playing, and it was selling out consistently, 4,000 people every night. And so there was a lot of demand for that. On the other hand, they had a Berlioz opera that was going to be playing following that. and it wasn't selling very well. So they extended this Porgy and Bess, and they shortened the Berlioz opera. And that type of that's not something that Woodstock could have necessarily done, right? It's not like they could say, oh, you know what, Jimi Hendrix is probably going to be more popular here. It looks like people really like his, so we're going to have him play a couple extra songs. I mean, that type of feedback loop wasn't something that they were really built to handle. And if I understand right, Jimi Hendrix was the last one, which is probably one of the more famous performances there. By the time he got on stage, the 500,000 crowd had dwindled to like 30,000. So like the thing it's most known for, they had the fewest people at, which I thought was kind of interesting. Okay, so now let's put that aside and we'll come back to it a little bit. But let's think about projects and products. So a project is going to have an end date, right? There's a time where we are doing this and then we will stop doing it at some point in the future. A product, on the other hand, is going to be something that we're thinking about, how does this look ongoing? A project is going to usually have a total cost budget. It's more of constraint. Here's the time and the amount of money we're going to spend on it. Whereas a product is going to be more something that we're funding on a yearly basis. You know, there's this amount of money and we hope to get this value from it. A project is going to have a defined scope, usually, or something of a defined scope. Here's what we hope to accomplish for this amount of money within this amount of time. Whereas a product usually is allowing for a little bit of uncertainty. And we're going to try these things and we're going to try to deliver value, but we're going to do this and this and this. And whatever seems to work the best, we'll do more of that and less of the things that don't work as well. If Porgy and Bess is really popular, we'll do more of that. If Berlioz isn't as popular, we'll do less of that. The project is usually focused on how do we deliver the objective, whereas the product is focused on how do we continually satisfy the customer. So Randy's asking, would you say that a multi-year project is really a product? So we'll talk about a little bit here. There's a lot of blending, I think, between stuff. And if you're working with Agile, you're probably bringing a lot of product thinking to your projects anyway. But yes, that is possible. To make a multi-year project successful, you're probably going to have to bring a lot of the product thinking into the way that you're working. And this is where these terms get a little bit ambiguous. It's not like there is a cutoff where you say this is one and this is the other. And that's one of the things we want to really think about is, are we thinking of this in a way that is appropriate for what we're hoping to accomplish? The terms we use to do it might be some nice broad categorizations, but the big thing we want to do is, are we thinking about this in a way that's going to make us successful? Because if we think about it in the wrong way, if we try to manage the Metropolitan Opera House the way that Woodstock was managed, it will be a total disaster. Conversely, if they brought in all the people to try to manage Woodstock the way that the Met is managed, that probably wouldn't have turned into what it was either, right? So we need to make sure we're managing things appropriately. So this is a Project Management Institute's definition of project. So it says a project is temporary in that it has a defined beginning and end in time, and there's therefore defined scope and resources. And a project is unique in that it is not a routine operation, but a specific set of operations designed to accomplish a singular goal. So that's the textbook definition of project. I know we use these words in lots of different ways, but this is how PMI defines it. And this is Accenture's definition of that's wrong up there. Should be a product. This is Accenture's definition of a product. So a product is a good service, platform, application system, etc. that is created generally for sale to meet customer and business needs. In retail and manufacturing, this may be taking materials and turning them into finished goods. In technology, your product may be software or a service which needs maintenance and upgrades. So one of the big things about this definition is this is looking at more of a total life cycle of something, like the value it's going to provide as well as the cost, as well as what we're willing to invest in it. So thinking about projects versus thinking about products. So how do we think about success? Well, with a project, usually success is we delivered the plan. You know, the customer asked for X, Y, and Z, and we delivered X, Y, and Z on time and in budget. Now, what the customer asked for may turn out not to be what the customer actually needs, but the project was still successful because we did exactly what we were asked for. Whereas a product thinking is going to be more aligned with continuing to satisfy the customer. And this is where some of these things are a little bit vague, because I know some people, if we're using Agile, we're probably going to try to run our projects in ways that's getting feedback from the customer as we build it. So that's where some of this stuff kind of exists on the spectrum. But if we want to make, like, you know, solid buckets that we're going to put things in, we think of projects more of a successful of delivered on the plan, and product is more successful in that it continues to satisfy the customer, even if we're taking different paths. We may try things and they fail, but that's okay because we learned something and then we're able to satisfy the customer. So if we think about Microsoft Word's definition of success is that people will buy the next version, or that's what it has been. The move to subscription makes it easier to measure if they are successful, since they can just count how many subscribers are joining. This is a pretty big shift. It used to be every few years there would be a big project at Microsoft, which would create the next version of Microsoft Office, and then they would try to sell it to people. And there were all these kind of, if you think of it kind of like lurching, right? There was an underlying product, which was Microsoft Office, but there was a project to create the next version. And then a project to create the next version and mess up the UI so no one knew where anything was again. And then another project to do, and they kept going through these stages, and those are probably all just, you could probably think of those as projects where we do something and then we see if people like it. We do something and see if people like it. That's not to say there was no product thinking, but their shift now is we're going to ask people to give us money every year in order to use this. And then we will continue on a rolling basis, keep delivering updates to this. And if we keep delivering updates that make it valuable for people, they'll keep giving us money every year. Well, that's a big shift to product thinking about how they're selling and how they're managing their service or their software. So how do we think about timelines? Well, on a project, we're going to be thinking in terms of a start and end date. We're going to begin on this date, and we're going to end on this date over here. With a product, we're going to be thinking more ongoing. It's not like Microsoft has a plan for, okay, we're going to do Microsoft Word until 2027, and then we're going to stop and then do something else, right? It's an ongoing thing. So how do we think about feedback? Well, with a project, often doesn't occur until the end of the project. So if you think about Microsoft Office, and I know they had user groups and feedback and things like that, but when they were delivering just, we're now using Microsoft Office 2010 or whatever, the real point that they got feedback from the customer base at large was when they actually started trying to sell it and seeing if people were willing to upgrade to it and pay money for it. Whereas with a product, we're usually looking for continual feedback and being able to correct our course as we go, which is what's happening more with Microsoft Office right now. I just read about a change they're making to Outlook that's going to make it more difficult to connect to Gmail. Well, that's something they're trying, and there's some good security reasons for doing that. But they may try that and then discover, you know what? We have lots of people unsubscribed for our service because of this. We're going to find a way to put that back in or take the next step to make it secure. But that type of feedback is happening. How do we think about the future? Well, a project assumes that we can predict the future. Right? We're doing a lot of guessing about what things will be like. We're going to work on this for a year and then deploy it into make it live for people to buy. And if we've correctly predicted what they want, then we'll be able to sell this. On the other hand, a product assumes we're going to need to change our plan. We're going to try something, get some feedback, see how it works. If it works well, let's do some more of that. If it doesn't work well, let's try something a little bit different. And we've got a lot faster feedback loop happening with a product. And like I said, these are very generic ways of thinking things. You'll probably find most things have a lot of overlap. You'll probably have products that have pieces of what you're working on that have a fixed start date and a fixed end date, and this is when these things are delivered. And you're going to find a lot of projects that do take into consideration customer feedback and course correction and stuff. So how do we think about longevity? Well, project, the software that will be rewritten. So usually if we're thinking of a project, we're probably thinking more in terms of we are going to create this, use it for a number of years. We'll eventually get to the point where it needs to, we're going to work on this for a year and then deliver it. And then the idea is people use it for an amount of time and maybe we'll do some maintenance, but then there'll come a point where we decide, okay, we're done with this. We need something new, and it's cheaper for us to rewrite it because that project was back in the past and we haven't necessarily invested in evolving it all over this time. So we finally get to a point where the cost of doing it that way, continue to do it the way it's written, is greater than the cost of rewriting it. That's a project approach to longevity. Whereas a project approach to longevity. Whereas a product is going to be more focused on software that we evolve and software that we're thinking about the total cost of ownership and the total life cycle. Like this is going to last for maybe 20 years before it's not necessary anymore, or 30 years until it's not necessary anymore. So we're going to make decisions today that are based on the idea that this is going to need to change and evolve over time as we move forward. How do we think about cost? Well, a project is going to be thinking about how much does it cost to be able to say we delivered the application. So what is it going to cost to be able to say the project was successful? Whereas a project is going to be thinking, what's the total cost of ownership over the life of this application? How much do we need to spend each year to deliver this and then to continue to evolve it so it will continue to meet the customer's needs? So they'll continue, like in Microsoft's case, so they'll continue to pay for the subscription. Or so they'll continue to say, yes, this is meeting our needs and we don't need to rewrite it. How do we think about our process? Well, a process for completing the agreed upon deliverables. So with a project, we're thinking about how do we get from this start date to this start date, and at the end, we've delivered everything and we haven't exceeded our budget. That's the process we're thinking about in a project. With a product, we're thinking about a process for determining and delivering what the customer wants. So there is the concept of how much are we going to spend. You do have some concept of how long it's going to take to deliver these increments, but we're really kind of moving up a level and saying it's not just enough we're not successful if we just do what we said we were going to do. These 3 things and then we're done. We're successful if we figured out what the customer is doing or what the customer needs, and we've delivered what they need, and it's in a way that they want, and it's timely enough that it met their needs, and it was at a cost that when you pass it on to them doesn't make them jump ship and go somewhere else. So within that, you may be doing things that look a lot like projects, but it's a very different way of thinking about what you're doing and thinking about what's valuable. So do your projects seem to incorporate product thinking? So if you think about the things that you're calling a project today, question is, do they incorporate some level of product thinking? So think about this. So our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. Does this sound more like what we described as a project or more what we described as a product or a project? I'm getting tongue twisters. If I said something backwards, correct it in your mind, because I probably have messed these up a few times. So most of us are saying this sounds more like product thinking. Highest priority is satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. This Agile principle doesn't really care what we said when we said we were going to start or when we said we're going to end, other than the fact it's satisfying the customer. It doesn't care if we said we were going to do X, Y, and Z, but if we did X and Y and the customer was satisfied, that still would have been success. So I would say this principle is encouraging us to think about the way we're delivering software and move up a level. So we're not just thinking of it like a project, but we're thinking of it more like a product, to where we're focused on how do we deliver for what the customer needs. Next question. Delivering working software frequently from a couple of weeks to a couple of months with a preference to the shorter time scale. To you, does that sound more like something you would experience on a project, based on how we described a project, or something that we'd be more likely to experience on a product? So if you think of a and keep in mind, I'm not trying to say that you can't do this type of thing on a project, but the point I'm trying to make is I think this is what Agile was trying to do. A lot of what Agile Principles try to do is take our projects and make us approach them with more of product thinking, because that's very, very valuable. So if you're starting to follow Agile Principles, you are starting to use product thinking. And so I think you'll find lots of things where like, oh, we're doing a project, but everything you said sounds about product thinking, sounds like kind of how we approach our projects. And that's good, right? Like I said, there's different, we're making some big buckets to put things in, but what we want to be careful to do is make sure that we're not thinking about our projects in a way that matches kind of that generic description of projects, when there would be value of thinking of them more as products, thinking more of how do we satisfy the customer and how do we think about the total life cycle cost. So this stuff exists on a spectrum. We've got project thinking over here, which meets more the, in beginning, end date. Maybe our budgets are based on when you complete, we're going to try to spend this amount to complete this work. And then we've got product thinking over there. That's more thinking about how do we continually satisfy the customer? How much do we need to spend each year to get the best total cost of ownership for whatever we're trying to deliver? And our projects can exist somewhere on the spectrum, right? In different places. And different aspects of the project can exist in the spectrum in different places. So for example, you might find that the way that you're working with your customer is very much product thinking. It's very focused on here's what do you need, and we're going to get feedback from you and give you exactly what you want, and we'll redirect stuff. If if we thought we were going to do X, Y, and Z, and we get into it and discover we can do half of X, Y, and then A instead of Z, that's fine. That's very much product thinking. But for a lot of places, the project thinking within what they're working on, the project thinking really ties to how they're budgeted for stuff. A lot of organizations are still really tied to budgeting, where we're going to fund a project rather than funding a product. And that is a very difficult shift for a lot of organizations to make. So different aspects of whatever of the software you're working on may be in different places on this spectrum. And it's useful thinking if there's a lot of tension in the way that you're delivering, particularly if there's a lot of tension with the Agile principles you're trying to follow, it may be because that principle is hitting up against something that's still over here on project thinking. Could be the budgeting or the way you interact with your customer or whatever it is. And sometimes those can be useful things to figure out what are those things where we're really still thinking like a project. And so we're creating tension because we're trying to develop in a way that's very much in a product centered, but we've got this thing that organizationally is still kind of back on the project thinking. And I also want to point out that not only can your software be at different places on the spectrum, but individuals can be at very different places on the spectrum. So if you've got somebody over here that's thinking product thinking, that's really how they're focused on things, and then you've got somebody here in maybe security that's very much in project thinking, and it's like you're going to finish everything after working on it for 2 or 3 years, and then we're going to prove that security wise, and then we'll be done with everything. You should expect there to be some tension around that, right? Because you've got people trying to do very, very different things. Some of this is just based on the history of your organization. So I'm not trying to say this is good or bad, but what I am trying to point out is being able to identify where this is happening can give you a lot of insight to why something might be harder than it seems like it should be, or where you need to invest more time. So product thinking is ongoing. It can become a habit, but it won't ever be something you finish. So I know if you've ever seen sometimes there's this idea of we're going to do an agile transformation, which those can be a good thing. But if you think you're going to transform the organization and then you're done and you don't have to worry about it anymore, you've kind of missed the point of agile. Product thinking is similar. You want to make it a habit in the way that you approach things. But if you think you can just, now we're doing product, now we're based on products instead of projects, so we don't have to think about this anymore, you're probably missing a lot of the value and a lot of the point behind it. So product thinking is ongoing. It's a shift to thinking in terms of total life cycle and the cost and benefit. Instead of thinking just we've got to start and end point, how much are we going to spend and what are we going to get out of it? So what does your organization spend more money on? Does it spend more money on the initial creation of a piece of software or on the ongoing support, maintenance, and updates of that piece of software? Yeah, so that's a good point. Sometimes initiatives start as a project, and then based on the success of the outcome, it gets converted into a product. That's very true. And I think a good point of that is it's not necessarily bad to have something as a project, but if it's turned from a project into a product and you keep trying to manage it like it was a project, you probably will be making decisions that are suboptimal for what you're for making it successful. So this kind of surprised me that so many people say the initial creation of a piece of software is where they spend more money. In a lot of organizations, you've got software that's been around maybe for 10, 15, 20 years. We may have maybe we've got more people that are kind of coming from a startup background here, and then that would make sense why that would be greater for them. But in most places, the amount that you're spending on the support, maintenance, and updates for a piece of software is much, much, much greater than what you spent on just kind of the initial thing to get it out the door and get it to working state. And the reason I want to bring that up is because if the product thinking should be encompassing how are we going to continue to support, maintain, and update this piece of software over the long run, over the total life cycle. Whereas our project base is usually more on let's get this initial piece of software out the door. If you're in a startup, you're probably going to be much more kind of you may be a lot more in a project type environment because you want to get something out there quickly, see if it works. You're trying to experiment, and then the company may just completely fold, right? If that didn't work, you've got one shot at something. That would encourage you to make a lot of project type decisions that might not necessarily fully appreciate what the ongoing support and maintenance and updates of that piece of software. Now, for a startup, that might not necessarily be a
What
bad
shall I tell Golden?
I'm not sure what that is. Give me a second here.
You were wonderful! It was a miracle! Wonder of wonders, miracle of miracles.
Just a second.
God took a Daniel once again, stood by his side, and miracle of miracles walked.
Okay. I was introducing my kids to Fiddler on the Roof the other day, last night, and evidently I left it open, and for some reason this wanted to start playing right there. So I'm not sure why. So yes, Fiddler on the Roof. Great story. Okay, let me see where we were. Was not expecting that. Okay, let's see. I think we were on this one. Okay, yeah, so we were talking about how there may be places for projects, but you want to be very careful. If the startup is successful, they may need to do a lot of work to shift to being able to do a lot of work to shift to product thinking. And there may be a lot of stuff they have to redo in order to do that. That may not necessarily be bad if their time to market was an issue. But for most large companies, the ongoing support, maintenance, and updates of a piece of software is going to be the major investment for them. So let's talk about shifting to product thinking and what that kind of looks like. So if you start out with kind of thinking that you're going to consistently complete tickets and that's your goal, that's going to be more on the project side of things, generally. I'm going to deliver these tickets. We're not necessarily thinking about, does it satisfy the customer? Just there's tickets and we're going to move through those. Then we probably shift to saying, okay, let's now focus more on the incremental delivery of valuable software. And that's Agile should push us toward that a little bit more. And then if we keep on evolving, we probably ought to get to the point where we're making evolutionary addition of value, to where we're thinking in terms of how do we evolve or grow this software from where it is today to where it does a little bit more for the customer in a way that's sustainable and has good total cost of ownership. So this kind of represents where I can see you moving from a project-based thing of just I'm going to complete these tickets and I need to get all these tickets before the end date and within the budget, to where we're really thinking of how we're adding value, and that being the important thing, but how do we add value and continue to evolve this piece of software going forward? So what does your organization think the developers are doing? So this isn't a question about what they're actually doing, but if you were to ask somebody in your organization about, our developers, what do you think they do all day, and give them these choices, which do you think they're more likely to choose? So we look like we've got about 37% saying that the organization kind of thinks of them as completing tickets. And I would suggest that if you're in that boat, there's probably more of a project perception of things. Not necessarily, but just in general. I would consider if that it might be something that's the prevalent way of seeing things in your organization. If the focus is on delivering software, I think that's probably a step up in delivering useful software. That's probably a step up in Agile, pushing more toward thinking about what the value is being delivered, but it's still not focused necessarily on the value. If you're down here to where people are seeing developers as they're adding value to this particular piece of software, value that's tied directly to the customer's experience or to what people experience, that probably is the most product-oriented way of thinking about it. Now, in the way I ask this question, your organizations could be thinking the developers are just completing tickets, and they could be all 100% talking to the customer and adding value to the customer. But just the perception in the organization may be an indication of how your organization sees the way they're organizing their work. So how do you get your organization thinking more about value? So we've mentioned that if we can move more toward thinking about how we deliver value, we're going to push ourselves more to thinking about how to keep the customer happy, and we should be thinking more about what the total life cycle cost is of something and total life cycle value of it. So how do you get your organization thinking about value? Well, this is a graph I like using, and we think of things, we're always going to be making trade-offs between the value we deliver and the time it takes to deliver them. So here's something we're trying to deliver, and it will provide us 1 unit of value per unit of time, and it'll take us 3 units of time to deliver it. On the other hand, here's something else we could deliver. This could be a story, a feature, could even possibly be a project, right? But we'll leave that on the table for now. But this one delivers 3 times as much value per unit of time and only takes 1 unit of time to deliver. So if we are thinking of the next step we take, if this is what's in our mind, we are going to be able to be a lot better about prioritizing what we work on next. So for example, if I've got that first story feature, whatever this unit of work is, it takes 3 units of time to deliver, delivers 1 unit of value. Then I've got one here that takes 2 units of time and delivers 2 units of value. And then this last one, which was the green box I showed a minute ago, it only takes 1 unit of time to deliver, but delivers 3 units of value. Well, then if I look at these will continue to deliver value. So this green is down here is how much I've earned, right? This area right here, how much I've earned from that first story that I took 3 units of time to deliver. And this area up in here is, oh, hand cuts off. Okay. How much I'm delivering those 2 units of value that I get for each unit of time. And at the top, those 3 units of value that I get from each unit of time. So this would be one way of approaching stuff. On the other hand, if we take these things and reorder them like this, it's the same exact units of pieces of work, but now look how much I've delivered that I didn't deliver before. And my purpose in showing this isn't that you need to take everything and graph it out, though this might be a useful exercise, but this is what the stuff that goes into this drawing is what people should be thinking about as they decide what to work on next. So is your organization thinking about the value you get versus the amount of time it will take and what those trade-offs are? And yes, as Ian said, the cost of delay. If I choose to do A, how much is it costing me to wait on getting B? And am I making a rational choice in that? So what would it look like if your organization is thinking about the difference between the trade-offs we're making between time and the value that those things deliver? So in your organization, who has the best understanding of what value will be provided by the delivery of a particular story? We'll use story for the unit of work here. Could be anything. But is it the developers that have the best idea of the value? The end users, the project managers, or executives? So saying here that the end users have the best idea of the value, and that's very likely. It could, you could probably make a case for it being kind of executives and the people that are actually dealing with the money. If we think back to Microsoft, like I said, there's not a right or wrong answer here, but if we think of Microsoft, the people that are dealing with how many people are still subscribed, we're going to make this change. It's going to kick a bunch of people off that are using Outlook with Gmail. The people the end users are going to know what the impact is to them individually, but it may be the executives and managers and people that are looking at the books that really can see, oh, wait, we did this, and look, our subscribers are going down. So there may be some cases where the value as represented by dollars may be something that the executives are in the best position. And it may depend on what the actual thing is that we're doing. So in some situations, it may be the end users, and others it may be the executives. And it probably depends on if you're going to doing internal software or working with something that's like to the end consumers or something like that. It really should be the end users, but developers think they do. Okay. That's an interesting point, right? If one of these groups think that they understand the value the most and they don't, they may make some really bad decisions. Okay, well, now let's look at the other side of it, though. At your organization, who has the best idea of how long it will take to deliver a valuable change? So we want to deliver this valuable change, and it's going to take some work. Who's in the best position to know how much work it will take, how risky it is? So it looks like most are saying developers. In some cases, it may be the project managers. You may know that the developers will say it takes 2 days, and the project manager says that means 6 days. So they've got the best idea of it. That might be the case. But notice no one here is actually saying that it's management executives or customers. Those people seem to have the least idea probably of how long or what will actually be involved in something. And the point I want to make with this is that the information about how valuable something is and how much time it will take, that exists all in different places in your organization. And the only way you're going to be able to actually have discussions about it and make good decisions is if you've actually got communication going up and down the management change and across. If that's not happening, you're not going to be making good decisions. You're not going to be able to manage your product successfully because the information you need to be able to think about those trade-offs between time and value exists in places with people that may not be talking to each other. So this is one of the big things that I see as a key of product thinking. If I'm just doing a project and it doesn't matter, it's just you're going to do these 20 things and here's how much money you have and here's how much time it will take, maybe it doesn't matter how valuable they are. But if I'm thinking more of maybe it doesn't matter how valuable they are if you're just dealing with a project. If we're thinking of a product, it becomes very valuable very valuable how much time it's going to take and how valuable each piece of the value produced by each piece. So this communication becomes very important, and the feedback and communication up, down, sideways becomes very, very important when it comes to product, being successful with delivering a product. So how can executives and managers encourage product thinking? And when I wrote this, I was thinking executives and managers. I think a lot of these things will be true no matter where you are in the organization, whether you can be a developer, these are things that you can do, but these are the things that you want to get happening in your organization. So some of the things are focus on prioritization process, right? Thinking about how valuable it actually is, making sure we actually have an idea of whether it is amazing how often we can deliver software that's exactly what was asked for that no one actually needs or no one will actually use. So focusing on the prioritization process is very, very important. With a project, it appears less important because we're going to do all these things and then we'll be done at the end. With the product, we may do very, very different things, right? We may try something and decide it doesn't work, or we may decide we need to make sure we put ourselves in the best possible future. The thing I mentioned with Microsoft making Outlook where it doesn't work with Gmail, there are things that's driving that they're deciding that is valuable based on security things they're running into. So they're probably running into a lot of security issues that are like, hey, we can fix this for all these people that are having problems if we change how this works. So point number 2, ask about cycle time instead of project and date. So this is particularly true for executives, but when executives come in, managers come in, and their focus is on when will this body of work be done, it inspires project type behavior. It inspires people to take whatever shortcuts they need to be able to get X, Y, and Z done by the date and under budget. There may be some cases where you want that, but if a project is less well aligned with the value it provides for the customer, that might be counterproductive. You probably want to ask them more about the cycle time because that determines when you're going to actually get feedback from it from the customer and make sure you're actually headed in the right direction. So I know I've worked with some organizations and encourage the higher up executives to, when they come in and talk to the developers, to ask, when was our last deploy? When was the last deploy that we got through to the customer? When's our next one? And it makes that shift to thinking in terms of how do I get rapid feedback and away from just how do I cram everything in and then say I'm done at the end of it. How you define value? That's a good question. It could be very different for different organizations. Eventually, somebody is going to be using your software and it will make them happier, right? It makes them happier in a way that lets them do something they couldn't do before. So that's a very generic answer, but that probably is something you need to talk about for your organization, right? In your organization, what do you describe as value? And this gets really, really interesting when you're dealing with nonprofits because their term of value may not have anything to do with how much money you've actually made. Government organizations can be a little bit like that as well, but particularly nonprofits where they've got a mission. And it can be very offensive, I've discovered. If you start going in and say, okay, your mission was to do this, this, and this, put a monetary value on that for these people you're helping, and then we'll add them up to see. So that may not be the best way to do it, but that is a potential way to do it. If we have people come to these, let's say it's something getting people out of poverty, if we're able to get people to go through these 3 steps of the program, we're going to put some type of numerical value on that we can add up to say, are we doing better than we were last month? And if we made this change, did it drive? It's a very scientific approach to, am I measuring things that are important, and am I looking at how the changes to what we're doing impact those measurements? Knowing your customer is much harder with a project than a product. Yes, that's a good point. And actually, that's a very good point, Simon. One thing I found is if you're working on a product, it's usually easier to try to get customers on, get people involved in this is just regularly I'm going to participate in this. Instead, with a project, you end up more with the idea of, okay, yeah, I'll help you for a few weeks and then we're done. That's all. Or I want to wait till everything's done and then I'm going to take a look at it and see if it does what I asked for, a year later, and then I'll tell you everything you did wrong, that you misunderstood what I said. Okay, number three, bring attention to the total life cycle cost and value. So make sure that discussion is coming up. I've been on some projects that have never mentioned that. Or from an executive level, that's never mentioned as the total life cycle cost and value. I've been on others where when developers are doing something like, hey, we ran into this thing, we've got two ways of doing this, we're not really sure which one to choose. The way we're going to do it isn't going to work the way we thought. We've got these two options to choose from. When the executives start saying, well, what implication would those two decisions have on the total life cycle cost of what we're doing here? That gets people thinking very much along the lines of a product. Now, they may choose to do something shorter and faster and then grow it later, but just bringing that up is a huge step forward for a lot of teams. And ask questions about the cost of delay. So we're working on X, Y, and Z. Well, that's great. What did we decide not to do in order to work on X, Y, and Z? And make sure that we're thinking about, was that actually the right choice? And I'm not saying just to undercut any decision the team has made, but you do want to make sure that you're, from executive level, you're showing that those things are important and that you're recognizing, if we chose to do this, we decided not to do something else. And if they can say, if you're talking to people, they can say, we chose to do X instead of Y, and here's why we decided that was the best next thing to work on. If they've thought through that, then really encourage that. That's a really, really good thing, because it means we're thinking like a product rather than a project. If they don't know why they chose it, help them to decide why was this necessarily better, or should next time, if we're in a situation, should we have worked on Y first? Because if you start asking those questions, a lot of management comes down to asking the right questions and getting people to ask those questions on their own. And this could be a whole talk on its own, so I better move on. Okay, so we've got these three things. We've got project, product, and then we've got portfolio, which I just want to throw in here just so we kind of see how those things fit together. So here's some very loose definitions of these things. We've got project, a body of work with specific deliverables and a start and end. So that's what we've been talking about. So if we think of that, when Apple decided to rewrite Mac OS to work on Apple processors, that was, for the most part, a project. They were going to start and they were coming to a point where it was an end. We will get everything to work on Apple processors. Now, there's going to be continual work. They're going to continue to develop Mac OS, but that was there already. But there was a specific project to go ahead and rewrite the stuff and test it and make sure it worked on their new processors they were making. Whereas a product, it's ongoing effort that evolves to continually deliver value to the user. So if we go back to our Apple example, Mac OS might be an example of an ongoing product, right? It's an ongoing effort. It's not like Mac OS they're not planning on shutting down Mac OS next year. They'll keep on coming out with new versions, and they keep on doing updates. So even though it's got new versions that come out, it's almost rolling, right? They'll roll stuff out and they kind of package things together and do a little big hoopla about it, and roll out the next version. Same thing with iOS that runs on your phone, GarageBand, which lets you do music stuff that comes with Apple machines, Logic, which you have to pay for, iMovie, Final Cut Pro. There's all these things that are products that are managed and are continually updated. New things come out, are regular. Some of them updated in different, like Mac OS gets lots of updates. iMovie, I don't think has seen very many updates recently, but it still is something that they're looking at the total cost, the total life cycle of this. Now, the portfolio, I would define it, there may be different ways of defining, but I would define it as a set of products collected and managed in a way that recognizes how they interact. Now, this could be a whole nother talk, but if we look at that, when Apple is, if you look at how Apple prices things. So, for example, iPads have gotten to the point that you can run video editing software on them, and in some cases, it may be even faster than your desktop computer if you're using like a MacBook Air or something like that. So when they are managing all these things and thinking about what to put in each product, they're thinking in terms of, okay, well, we don't want to, if we put everything into iMovie that people could need, we will cannibalize our Final Cut Pro sales. And if we make it to where we don't, we'll cannibalize our Final Cut Pro sales. On the other hand, Final Cut Pro, do we want that to be the same thing that you run on the the iPad? Do we want it to be to where you have to pay more to have it on the iPad? And what they eventually came down to is Final Cut Pro on the computer, you buy and then you own it. Final Cut Pro on iOS is a subscription-based service. And so they were making decisions at a portfolio level, thinking about how these different things interacted. And they're also looking for ways they can reuse stuff. They're probably, I believe there is some code in probably that's used in iMovie and Final Cut Pro for iOS and Final Cut Pro for macOS that's used across that. But the point is these are being looked at from a standpoint of how the entire ecosystem they create, not just single things that are completely separate. Now, if you look at how Google has managed a lot of their products, sometimes it feels like they don't have very good portfolio management, because Google seems like whenever somebody wants to start a new messaging system, that's not a problem, because they've had like 3 or 4 messaging systems all working at the same time. You've got a Duo, and there was Google Hangouts, and then Chat, and I mean, all these different things. And I think they're trying to rein it in, but it's been a very different approach. There's been some benefits maybe from it. They've tried a bunch of things and they get rid of things that don't work, but very different approach than how Apple's kind of managed their portfolio. Projects, products, and portfolios all have their places. So it's not to say that one of these is better than the other, but you need to make sure you know what you're looking at. The way your organization thinks about the work needs to match what you are trying to achieve with that work. You have to they have to think about, so thinking about the Apple again, they have to think about features that are added to iMovie that might reduce the value of Final Cut Pro, and what capabilities should be included in the iPad version and how it should be sold. Actually, that was my note that I kind of did earlier. But these things all have their place. Sorry, I've got a fly attacking me here. What you don't want to do is manage a product like a project. If you actually have a product, you don't want to manage it like a project. If you've actually got the Metropolitan Opera, you don't want to manage it like you would Woodstock. Otherwise, you're likely to make very bad decisions about the overall life cycle and dramatically increase the cost of ownership, just because those are different, very, very different things. So there's I started to call it a project. It would be better described as a product that I worked on. And we wrote this over about 4 years, deployed it 5 years. It had been live about 5 years when this was on a treasury application. People at the Treasury were looking at it, the manager and executives, and were saying, you know what, this has been live for about 5 years. That's usually the point where we need to start talking about rewriting it. And the people that the business side of things said, no, actually we don't need to, because we've taken a product approach to this. We've been building things and continuing to deliver and keep things updated as we go. So we're not to a point where we feel like we need to rewrite it. Whereas if it had been a project, the Treasury was very used to projects, which meant after about 5 years, you usually had to rewrite them. So that was an example of one that was very, very successful, because they were able to use the product thinking to avoid the pitfalls that the Treasury was used to seeing when they'd run into project thinking. So if we think of how are we doing on stuff here? Okay, if we think of wrong time. If we think of a product as being something like this, we may have projects within that, right? So this would be, maybe this is Mac OS, and then we've got a project to way down there was converting from PowerPC to Intel, and then another one was converting to the M1 processor lines and stuff. So that's our product here. And we may have multiple ones, like we've got all these projects going on, and all of those fit within a portfolio. So we've got these products, within them we may have products. We've got products, within them we may have projects, and looking at them all together is what we end up thinking of as a portfolio. So it's not that one of these is better than the other, but what we don't want to do is try to manage the product like we're managing a project. That's the big takeaway I hope everybody takes away from this. Okay, we've got a few minutes left, so let's do our quiz, giving away a copy, or giving away one of these t-shirts if I have your size, or one of the turn your video on t-shirts if I don't. I can't remember. I made a mistake in printing and I need to get some more printed. So anyway, you're competing for one of these. So join the quiz. I will throw the link in here. One last time. Okay, 5 seconds. And these are lovely, wonderful shirts. If you noticed, I wear them every single day. Well, when I'm on these calls. I do. Okay, 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, spelled wrong, but according to this talk, what might be included within the product line of work, within a product line of work? Might it be a project, the entire portfolio, or Woodstock style festival? What might be included within a product line of work? Project, the entire portfolio, or Woodstock style festival? So yes, within a particular product, we may have a project. So remember, we're talking about Mac OS might be a product, but we might have a project to deliver the update to work on a new processor. So yes, the project. Okay, there's our leaderboard. Moving on, what did Microsoft do with Office that represents a significant shift away from upgrades as projects and aligns with product thinking? So they shifted from the idea of every few years we're going to have a big project to create a new version, and they're doing something that's more product thinking. Is it the ribbon interface, new logos, rolling updates, or Microsoft Project? And yes, it is the rolling updates, to where there's not even necessarily a new version coming out. It's just new updates all the time. And it's giving them faster feedback and the ability to look at how many people are staying subscribed and how many people are using different features. Okay, Brian pulls into the top spot. Next question, how do you get your organization to shift toward product thinking? Is it with unlimited vacation, more work from home programs, change your programming language, or make sure everyone is communicating in terms of time value trade-offs? How do you get your organization to shift toward product thinking? Yes, make sure everyone is communicating in terms of time value trade-off, because that means that you're thinking about the work you're doing like it's a product instead of just a project that we start here, we end here, and here's everything that we deliver. It means that you're getting feedback. Okay, Dylan is at the top spot, followed by Brian, Dustin, David, and Age. I think I'm saying that right. Next question. Project versus product thinking exists on a pie chart, hierarchy of needs, flux capacitor, or spectrum. Project versus product thinking exists on a pie chart, hierarchy of needs, flux capacitor, or spectrum. Yes, it exists on a spectrum. Remember, we can have some aspects of our software could be in the project area, other aspects could be in the product area. We may even have individuals that see things very, very differently. And we just need to be aware that our definitions that we gave here are more clear cut, but in actual practice, there's going to be a lot more squishy and weebly wobbly, right? There's going to be a lot more spectrum between them. Okay, Age is in the first spot, followed by Lucas, David, Brian, and Sarah J. I think this is the last question. What question from executives will push teams away from product thinking and toward project thinking? So this isn't what we want. How can we help better prioritize the work? What's the cost of delay for the work we're choosing not to do next? And when will this all be done? Or what is the airspeed of an unladen swallow? Time's up. And yes, if we ask them if we want them to think about product thinking, we don't want to ask, when will this all be done? Because the when will this all be done pushes teams away from thinking about the product and pushes them toward thinking about when the project will be done. And that's a little bit of a tricky question there. But focusing a team on, you got to get this done, hurry up, get this done, hurry up and get this done, here's the deadline, will move away from product thinking. Whereas we want to get them more thinking about what's the cost of delay, are we prioritizing well, are we choosing the next best thing for the customer? And congratulations, Sarah J, you're in the top spot. Send me an email, let me know what your shirt size is and your address, and I will send you one of these t-shirts. I hope you enjoy it. And let's see, I want to see if I had any questions. Okay, that wraps up what I was hoping to cover. I'm going to stick around and see if there were anybody added any questions to anything here. But thank you for coming. And if you need to drop, I'll stick around, answer any questions or discuss anything that people want to for a little while. Okay, nothing on that, so cool. Anyone sticking around that has any thoughts, concerns, ideas, aggravations?
Just minor thing, but I think your poll made the when will it be done as the correct answer and not the cost of delay.
I worded it a little bit tricky. I said, what will push you toward projects and away from products? So yeah,
got
it
it.
was
That's why. I got it.
that may not have been the best way to do it. There was a little bit of a trick in there. Yeah. So what questions will push teams away from product thinking toward project thinking? And so yes, that
Yeah, good point.
it's not it's what you don't want to do, which probably I may need to rethink this.
Yeah.
But yes, it was
I,
tricky.
I was in my read the question real fast and answer real fast mode.
Yeah,
So yeah,
the
I
fact
got
that
slapped from that.
the time measures into the score makes this really hard when I throw something like this in there. But yeah, thanks for bringing
Yeah.
that up, and because I did want to double check that.
Oh, you're good. Thanks.
Any upcoming courses? Ksenia, I'm hoping to get one to redo the one that you did with me, and hopefully do another one here pretty soon. But I haven't got it coming out. I will make sure I will tell people multiple times though when it comes out, so you shouldn't be able to miss it. Any other thoughts?
Hi, Mark. I have a question.
Yes.
Because while you were talking, I kind of had an idea. Um, Recently there had been some development in my organization, but then because I'm a Scrum Master, I always try to understand what leadership is thinking about my team. So when you said you gave that survey about understanding what the organization is thinking about, what the developers are doing, you mentioned something like delivering software, completing tickets, and adding value. So I started thinking about maybe because we are about to get into a new I just had this idea of maybe creating a Slido, a survey, and sending to leadership to see what they're thinking about my team and to see how I'm going to do it. But then I just kind of developed a cold feed because I'm like, now if they ask me, okay, what is the whole reason for this survey? I have idea of what I want to tell them, but then I think it's not strong enough. So I think I'm kind of asking you if you have like um to just give me a little hint of what am I kind of.
So like what could you ask executives that would give them an idea of how they see your team?
Yeah, because I have like group of developers. We kind of maintain software for our appointment scheduling. So we'll have some little challenges with multicultural team to kind of determine what languages to be added next. But then the leadership told us the other time that they will start pulling metrics. Yeah, I'm good with metrics, but sometimes I look more on delivery. So I'm just trying to open their eyes to know that metrics are good, but sometimes we look at the delivery of work. Like you said, like we all know, metrics can be how should I say it? Someone can just I'm looking
They can
for
be
the right word.
gamed, right?
Yeah, and they can be influenced also.
Right.
We can decide to, you know what, let us put all the work on the board to done. But is it really done? So I'm just trying to open their eyes to delivery of work,
So
like to focus more on delivery instead of metric.
when it comes to metrics, one of the conversations I have a lot of times with executives when working with teams is trying to say, okay, with the team, here's what we're trying to do. We're going to make sure that our definition of done is a definition that means the same thing to everyone and actually means it's done. And then I usually talk to executives and say, that may mean we may not have anything done for a while because we can't even get to production yet, or whatever it is. But then encourage them saying, but if we use this definition, it will be much, much better because it gives you transparency into what's happening. But then the other piece is talking to them about how can we give you metrics that actually mean something. And so, for example, the number of story points that get done probably doesn't really help executives know. It's not going to give them high confidence that progress is actually being made. So what I'm usually trying to get teams to work on is saying what is the cycle time? How long did it take us from when we delivered something that the customer has said is valuable, no matter how small, all the way through to where the customer is using it? And let's say we start out and that takes 6 months to do. And that's our metric. It takes 6 months. But then we're able to make some improvements and we're able to get it down to 4 months or 3 months or 2 months, or maybe we can even get down to a few weeks. And those type of metrics especially if you've got a good definition of done, are very hard to, they're hard to game. It's hard to make them go up without actually doing good things, especially if you've got the right guardrails around them. But they actually mean something that's important to the customer. We start on something, here's how long it took us to deliver it. So those are, when it comes to the metrics, that's what I would try to do, is make sure we've got metrics that everybody agrees with, that people know what they are, and that actually mean something that's useful.
Thank you.
But the other question you had was like doing a poll to executives.
Yeah. So
I
leadership.
I think it would be interesting to talk to a few executives and say, how would you describe what our team provides? And if they
Yeah.
say, you know, they provide bug fixes, or they provide valuable software, or they provide value that makes customers buy our product, you know, whatever that is, but get an idea of what some of those things are, and then sending out as a poll would be interesting to see. One trade-off, depending on your organization, though, you may find that having the conversations with the executives about how they see it is way more valuable than sending out a poll to them. So you might start with
Okay.
talking to a few of them and see how valuable that is. And then if that seems valuable to have conversations, maybe you just work your way through talking to a bunch of people, you know, get 15 minutes and just talk to them. Or things may come out of it that may point you to say, oh, well, this could definitely be a survey. I'm going to take kind of the experience from this, and now I know how to ask my questions in a way on the survey.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts? Okay, well, I hope to see everybody next week. Thank you so much for coming and participating.